The deed came through on a Tuesday in April, which was not the day anyone had expected, and not the day anyone had planned for, but that was the nature of things at Harlan Crossing. The important moments arrived slightly off schedule, quiet, without announcement. She was standing at the trading post counter when the circuit rider brought it in. The counter was new pine, still pale, not yet worn to the gray the older boards had taken on. The cedar box sat beside her right hand, its lid closed, its brass latch catching the morning light that came through the south window in one long slant. 2 cups of coffee steamed on the counter. She had made them both without thinking, the way a person makes coffee when they know someone else will be there, and she had not asked herself when that had started. Outside, the road was dry. It was graded now, packed to a firm clay surface that held wagon wheels without pulling at them, and on either side of it, the lots ran back in measured rectangles, surveyed, staked, occupied. 12 families, not counting the 2 of them. The circuit rider set the deed on the counter. He said the filing had gone through without contest. He said it with the flat efficiency of a man who had said it before, and then he asked if there was a second cup going, and she poured him one without ceremony. The deed was folded once. She did not open it. He came in through the back, boots loud on the new floor, and stopped when he saw the circuit rider. He read the room in the way he read most things, without asking, without hurrying, and then he looked at the counter, at the deed, at the 2 cups of coffee. He picked up the second cup. He did not say anything, neither did she. The circuit rider drank his coffee and made a note in his ledger and left them to it. This is where the story ends up. 2 people standing in a trading post they built from a supply ledger and a single carpenter's hand, and 6 months of labor that left them both leaner and quieter than when they had started. A deed on a pale pine counter, the cedar box beside her hand, closed, carrying what it had always carried, a secret she had never offered, and he had never asked for. But this is not where the story begins. The story begins in October, 6 months earlier and 8 months behind, on a rail platform at the edge of a half-built town where the wind had a particular quality, flat and cold and without apology. And a woman stepped off a train with a canvas bag in one hand and a cedar box tucked under her arm. And a man stood at the edge of the platform with a wagon he needed to fill and a deed he needed to keep. He had not planned on asking. She had not planned on answering. The train came in at 2:30, which was late, and the sky had already decided against warmth for the day. The platform was weathered pine, 4 planks wide, raised just enough that a person stepping off would feel, for one moment, taller than the town. She was the last one off. Not because she was slow, because she waited until the other passengers had cleared, a traveling merchant with 2 trunks, a family with a boy who kept dropping his hat. And then she stepped down onto the platform with her canvas bag in one hand and the cedar box tucked under her other arm, and she looked at the town the way a person looks at a thing they are trying to decide the honest size of. He was at the edge of the platform, not waiting in any restless way, just standing, the way a man stands when he has already decided to be patient and is now simply enacting that decision. The wagon was behind him on the road, empty, the horse indifferent to the cold. She saw the wagon first, then him. He said, "You're the woman from Cheyenne." It wasn't a question. She said yes anyway. He told her his name for the town, not for himself. Harlan Crossing, 11 residents, trading post not yet finished. He said the land grant required a settled household before April, and that the circuit judge was due through in 2 weeks, and that he needed a wife on paper, legal, short-term, 6 months at the outside. And he said it the way a carpenter describes a structural problem, not apologetically, not with persuasion, just with accuracy. He said she would have her own space. He said room and board. He said 6 months, dissoluble by either party, 30 days written notice, and that he could not speak to what came after, but he could speak to what was in front of them. He did not tell her what the town needed her to be. He told her what he needed, and let her decide if she was it. She stood with the cedar box against her ribs and the wind moving flat and cold across the platform, and she looked at the wagon and then at the half-built line of structures at the edge of what might become a main street, and she counted something. He would not know what she counted, not then. And at the end of that minute she picked up her bag and walked to the wagon. She put the canvas bag in first. The cedar box she kept on her lap when she climbed up. He did not help her up, and she did not wait to see if he would. He gathered the reins. The horse pulled without ceremony. The platform fell away behind them, and the town came up ahead, raw and unfinished, and the road was not yet graded, and she held the cedar box with both hands as the wagon moved. Neither of them spoke. The wagon stopped in front of the one completed cabin, and he climbed down, and she climbed down after him, and that was the whole of the arrival. He showed her the cabin in 4 sentences. Stove, bunk room, separate. Water from the creek, half a mile east. He would be sleeping in the trading post until the roof was finished. She set the cedar box on the table and looked at the room. Then she went outside and looked at everything else. She walked the length of what would be the main street, 2 ruts and a line of intent, and counted the structures the way she had counted something on that platform. 4 tents, canvas dark with weather, roped to stakes driven into ground that was already beginning to freeze at depth. The trading post, 3 walls up, the 4th framed but open to the air, a tarp stretched across the top that moved when the wind came. 1 cabin, his, the only thing plumb and solid on the entire claim. 11 people. She met them one by one across the first 3 days, not by seeking them out, but by being visible, and still long enough that they came to her. A woman with 2 small children, whose husband was one of the laborers on the trading post. An older man who had been a sutler and now managed the goods that were stored in stacked crates inside the half-built post. A young man, 19 maybe, who did whatever needed doing and slept in his coat. She did not withdraw. She asked the woman with children if she had needles. She did. A paper packet, most of them bent. She asked the sutler what the inventory looked like, and he told her it was a mess, and she said she would need a couple of hours with it, and he said help yourself. She spent 1 full morning on the crates, counted what was there, what was missing, what had been stored wet and was likely to rot before spring. She wrote it in a column, on the back of a piece of paper she found folded in the crate lid. When she handed it to him that evening, he read it without speaking, and then read it again. She had listed the well as the first entry. Not a suggestion, not a question, just the word, and beside it, before ground freezes hard. She began the mending with the children's things because they needed it most, and because the woman had not asked, which meant she was too tired, or too proud. And either way, the children's trouser knees were worn through. She sat in the cabin at the table with the cedar box open beside her and worked until the light gave out. The sutler started bringing problems to her on the 4th day, small ones at first. A tent seam, a broken buckle on a harness strap. She fixed them without remarking on it. The cold came in off the open ground, and she had made herself useful before anyone thought to decide if she was welcome. The loose board on the cabin step had been there since before she arrived. She knew this because the first morning she had felt it shift under her boot and had noted it and gone on. The second morning the same. The third. By the 4th morning it was gone, replaced, not patched, replaced. The new board flush and tight and smelling of fresh-cut pine. She did not mention it. Neither did he. She would not have noticed the firewood, except that she had already planned where she would stack today's load, and when she came around the corner of the cabin, it was already there, ranked neatly under the lean-to overhang, where the weather could not get to it. Her planned path had nowhere to go. She set down the wood she was carrying and stacked it beside his without comment. These were the things he did while she was not watching. The days were shortening fast, and the cold had real teeth in it now. Not the dry September cold that merely warned, but the actual October cold that meant what it said. The tent families had taken to sleeping in shifts to keep the fire managed. She had begun leaving extra thread and patches with the woman 2 tents over, left them on the tent's outer pole in the morning without knocking, found the tent pole bare by afternoon. They had not spoken directly about it. The woman had 3 children and a husband with a bad left hand from something that had happened before they came here, and she did not need to be asked to receive what was offered. She only needed it to arrive quietly enough that pride was not a condition of the transaction. The sewing went faster now that she understood what was needed. She kept the cedar box on the table while she worked, because the light was best there, and because she needed the things inside it, the needles and the good thread, and the small bone-handled scissors her mother had brought from Ohio before the Nebraska years. Before everything, she did not open the false bottom. She had not opened it since Cheyenne. She did not need to. She knew what was in it. The way you know a thing you carry long enough, not by looking but by weight. He came in from outside, near dark, and set a plate on the table beside her work, without asking if she'd eaten. She had not. She put the scissors down and ate while he banked the fire for the night. He did not watch her. She did not watch him. But she was aware of where he stood in the room, the way she was aware of the temperature, not by attention, just by the fact of being present. He took his coat off the peg and went out again to check the tent stakes in the wind. She picked up the scissors and went back to work. Outside, the first real snow of the year began without announcement. The snow came and stayed. 3 inches by morning, and the wind had packed it against the south wall of the cabin hard enough that he had to push the door open with his shoulder. She watched him do it from the table, hands around the coffee he had made before she woke. The man from Laramie arrived mid-morning. She did not know that was who he was at first. He came in on horseback, well dressed for the territory. A good coat, clean boots despite the weather, a horse that had not been cheap. He asked the man from the trading post frame something she couldn't hear, and the man from the trading post frame pointed toward the cabin. She set the coffee down. He came to the door and knocked, which no one at Harlan Crossing had yet done. She opened it. He took his hat off and held it, which was manners, and looked past her into the cabin before he looked at her, which was not. He said he was passing through, said he had interests in the territory, and made it his business to know how things were settling out. He used that word, settling, in a way that meant more than the ground. He asked how long she and her husband had been established here. She said since October. He looked at the room again. She watched him do it. He was cataloging. The single chair pulled to the window where she worked. The sewing kit open on the table. The way the space still had the feel of 2 people sharing it provisionally, because it was 2 people sharing it provisionally, and the cabin told the truth whether she wanted it to or not. He said he hoped they were comfortable. He said the Territory Land Office took a real interest in these small claims, said a settled household was a specific thing, legally, said a judge had to be satisfied, not just at signing, but at deed transfer. Said there were men who made it their occupation to bring questions forward about arrangements that looked more like convenience than commitment. He smiled when he said it. She said she hoped he enjoyed the rest of his ride. She closed the door. She stood inside it for a moment, in the cold that had come in with him. Then she went to the window and watched him ride back out the way he came, unhurried, a man with no reason to hurry, because time was working for him. When her husband came in that afternoon, she told him plainly what the man had said, what he had looked at, what he had not said but meant. He stood in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then he said, "How much can you be here?" She understood the question. It was not about geography. She said, "As much as it takes." He nodded once. Outside, the wind pressed the snow into new shapes against the wall, and neither of them moved toward the door. The snow held through the week. By Sunday it had settled into something quieter, not falling, just present, banked against the base of the cabin walls and smoothed flat across the yard. The wind had gone somewhere else. The morning had the particular stillness of a cold that had decided to stay. She had no task with a deadline. That was unusual enough that she noticed it. He had gone out after breakfast to help one of the tent families restake a canvas wall that had pulled loose in the week's wind. He took a mallet and did not say when he would be back. She watched him cross the yard, his breath coming in short white flags, and then she turned back to the room. On the table was the child's coat, the youngest of the Benner family, a boy of 4 who had worn through the left elbow on something she had not asked about. His mother had brought it the day before, with the particular careful expression of a woman unsure whether she was asking too much. She had taken the coat without comment and said she'd have it done by Monday. She settled at the table, lit a second candle, though the morning light through the window was enough. She opened the cedar box. The hinges were smooth. She had oiled them weeks ago, the first week, because the dry air had begun to make them catch. She found her needle case, her spool of brown thread, close enough to the coat's original color, a scrap of canvas she had saved from a torn supply sack, dense enough to reinforce the elbow from inside. She began to work. The stitches were small and even. She did not rush them. Outside, somewhere across the settlement, she could hear the mallet, a hollow knock, then silence, then another. A regular sound, a sound that meant the morning was ordinary. She reached back into the box for her small scissors. Her fingers found the edge of the tray. She did not mean to lift it, or perhaps she did, and simply had not decided. Her hands made the decision before she had. The way hands sometimes do when they know something the rest of you is still negotiating. The tray came up. The paper was still there. Folded in quarters, the creases worn soft from years of sitting in the same position. She did not unfold it. She knew what it said. She had read it so many times as a girl that the words had lost their shape and become something more like sound. Her mother's name, the quarter section near the plat, the date, the signature that had never been witnessed, never recorded, never made legal. Worth nothing. She looked at it for a moment in the candlelight. Then she set the tray back down, picked up her scissors, drew the thread through. The mallet knocked twice more across the yard, then stopped. The well was his idea, but the timing was hers. She had been keeping the waterlog since November, the number of trips to the creek each day, multiplied by the number of persons, set against the depth of freeze she measured with a stick each morning. She did the arithmetic in the margin of the household ledger and left it open on the table without comment. He looked at it that evening for a long time. The next morning he said they would start in December, before the ground locked too hard to work. 11 men came for the digging. She made coffee for all of them before first light, in both the good pot and the dented one, and she did not go back inside when the pots were empty. She picked up a rope. Nobody said anything. The man from the eastern tent, the one who had not spoken to her directly since October, looked at her, then at the coil in her hands, then away. She began measuring the depth guides, marking the rope at 3-foot intervals with strips of cloth torn from a flour sack, the way she had read it, done in a surveyor's handbook she had borrowed from the trading post and returned without mentioning. The days blurred into cold and labor. Frost was still in the ground at 4 feet. At 6, the soil turned dark and close-smelling. She logged the depth each evening, 6 feet, 7, 8 1/4. She kept the tally of what came up, the color of the soil, the moisture content she tested by pressing a handful, and she wrote it in a column next to the waterhaul log so that anyone who looked could see exactly what they were trading one effort for another. Her hands blistered, and she wrapped them at night with strips from the same flour sack. On the 11th day, at a depth of 19 feet, The man working the bottom of the shaft called up in a different voice than he had used all week. She was the one holding the measuring rope. She leaned over the edge and looked down. He climbed out slowly. His boots were wet. They lowered a bucket. When it came up, she was the one holding the rope, and she did not step back from it. She set the bucket on the ground and cupped both hands and lifted the water to her mouth. It was clean, cold in the way that only deep water is cold, as though it had been sitting in the dark for a long time, waiting. The man from the eastern tent was the first to step forward and take the bucket from the ground. He nodded at her once, a short, particular movement, nothing loose in it. She handed him the measuring rope and walked back toward the cabin to start supper, and behind her, she could hear the others coming. The well changed something. Not loudly. Nothing in Harlan Crossing changed loudly. But in the weeks after, she noticed the difference in the way people moved past her. Less like she was a fixture someone had placed there, and more like she was a person they had chosen to stand near. The woman from the eastern tent brought her 2 yards of brown wool without explanation, set it on the table, and left. One of the older men began leaving firewood stacked against the cabin wall each morning, split finer than he needed to split it. She did not remark on any of it. November passed. Then December came down from the northern range like a door closing, and whatever the settlement had not yet finished was simply not going to be finished until spring. They pulled inward. The tent families moved their lives into the trading post during the worst weeks, sleeping near the stove on bedrolls, their children quiet under the weight of the cold. January was harder still. The cabin held heat well. He had built it too. She had come to understand. The chinking between the logs was careful. The door fit flush on both sides. The floor had no lift at the corners. She thought sometimes, washing the supper dishes, that the cabin had been built by a man who intended to stay, and that this was not a small thing to know about a person. They had a routine by then. Supper at the same hour. The lamp moved to the table while she washed up. He would stay at the table with the settlement ledger, or the land correspondence, and she would take up whatever mending had come in during the day. There was always mending, from the tent families, from the trading post men, and they would sit across from each other in the lamplight, not speaking, not needing to. One evening in January, she was near the end of a collar repair when she looked up and found that he had closed the ledger. His hand was flat on the table. Not resting. Flat. The way a hand is when the person it belongs to has stopped moving and is simply staying still where they are. He was looking at nothing in particular. The lamp made a small sound. She set down the collar. She picked up the coffee pot from the stove and crossed to the table and refilled his cup. He did not look up when she did it. She set the pot back and returned to her chair and picked up the collar again. The fire shifted. Outside, the wind moved against the cabin wall and then moved on. They sat there until the lamp began to gutter, and neither of them mentioned that it was late, and neither of them moved to end the evening. The silence between them had the particular quality of something that has been worn smooth, not empty, but finished, the way a stone is finished by water over a long time. The storm came in on a Tuesday and did not leave. By the second morning, the wind had packed snow against the lower half of the window, and the light inside the cabin had taken on a gray, underwater quality, flat and without direction. They worked at what could be worked at indoors. She mended. He sharpened tools that did not need sharpening, and then began drawing out measurements on a scrap of lumber with the stub of a carpenter's pencil. On the third afternoon, she reached for something on the high shelf and caught the cedar box with her elbow. It fell straight down and hit the edge of the table, and the false bottom sprung open the way it always threatened to. The latch had been loose for years, long enough that she hardly thought of it anymore. The folded paper inside landed on the table between them. He picked it up before she could. She did not move to take it back. She stood, with her hand still raised slightly from where she had reached, and watched him unfold it, read it, refold it along its original lines. He held it out. She took it. Neither of them spoke. He looked at the paper in her hand for a moment, not at her face, at the paper, and then he looked back down at the lumber he had been marking. She set the box on the table. She fitted the false bottom back into place with the heel of her hand, pressing until she felt the latch catch. She set the folded paper inside it. She set the box back on the shelf. The storm moved against the roof, a sound like something rolling over and settling. She sat back down. She did not look at him. She took up the mending in her lap, and for a while, the only sounds in the cabin were the wind and the fire and the small scratch of his pencil on the wood. After supper, when the lamp was lit, he set the lumber aside and drew out a fresh sheet of paper. Not a scrap, a full sheet from the ledger drawer. He smoothed it on the table and spent a moment looking at it without doing anything. Then he began to draw, not words, lines, the kind a carpenter makes when he is measuring something that does not yet exist. She watched from her chair once, briefly, and saw the grid beginning to form. Rectangles, small notations at the corners, a line that could have been a road. She looked back down at her work. He was not a large man. He wore a town coat and carried a small leather case, and he stood at the edge of the settlement's main track for a long moment before moving, looking at it the way a buyer looks at livestock, measuring, not impressed, not yet dismissive. She saw him from the trading post doorway. She had been sorting a shipment of flour sacks with one of the women who'd come in the fall, stacking them along the back wall. When she looked up, he was already walking the perimeter, slow and unhurried, noting things she could not read at this distance. She watched him stop at the new well casing, run his hand along the timber, look down into it. He spoke to 3 of the residents. She did not approach, neither did she retreat. He spoke to the man eventually, in the open, near the half-finished second cabin. She watched from 40 feet away without moving toward them. The conversation lasted perhaps 4 minutes. The man from Laramie had a book in his case, and he opened it, ran a finger down a column, listened to something said in reply. He closed the book. He looked once toward the trading post, toward her, she understood, or toward the smoke from the cabin stove, or toward the lines of the settlement that had taken 11 months to draw against the land. Then he closed the case and walked back to his horse. He did not look at her directly. He mounted, adjusted the reins, and rode back the way he had come. Not hurrying. There was nothing left to hurry about. She turned and went back to the flour sacks. That evening he said nothing about it. He ate. He looked at his papers once, then set them aside. She poured 2 cups of coffee and left one at his end of the table, and he drank it without comment. The fire needed a log, and she added one, and the room settled. It was later, when she was near the window and the lamp was low, that she understood what had shifted. The 6 months were nearly done. The conditions of the arrangement had been met, and now the one person positioned to contest it had come and seen and gone home. There was no longer any requirement, no judge who needed convincing, no speculator who needed deceiving, no land-grant clause pressing them into the same cabin another night. What remained was only what they had built. She did not say this. She stood at the window and watched the dark past the glass, and after a while she turned and sat back down. She lay awake a long time. The fire had burned down and she had not rebuilt it, and the cold that came in at the edges of the window was the particular cold of late March, not the hard cold of December that demanded something from you, but the soft, patient cold of a season ending. She listened to the settlement around her, quiet, one of the horses shifting in the lean-to, the creak, just audible if she held still. She had her mother's cedar box on the table beside the bed. She had not opened it. She didn't need to. She knew what was inside, the folded paper that meant nothing legally, that no court would honor, that she had carried anyway for 3 years because it was the only thing that had survived intact. her mother's name on a deed that had never been filed, a claim to land that had already become someone else's. She had enough now, that was the plain fact of it. 4 months of wage held back, he had insisted, sat in a tin on the shelf above the stove. Not a fortune, but enough to reach a town of some size. Enough to rent a room for a month while she looked for work. The sewing business she'd built in Harlan Crossing had given her a name for the things she was capable of. She could take that with her. The arrangement allowed for it. 30 days written notice, and it was done. She had always known the door was there. She thought about the man from Laramie riding away, not hurrying. She thought about the deed transferring in April. She thought about the 11 people who had become 23, and who, every one of them, called this place by its name, now the way you call a thing by its name, when you believe it will outlast you. She thought about 2 cups of coffee, the habit of it, the way it had never been spoken about. She slept, finally, somewhere in the small hours. In the morning she dressed and came to the front room. He was already up. The fire was going. On the counter sat 2 cups, and the coffee was fresh, and he was at the table, with his survey papers laid out the way he always had them, the deed plot on the left, the water notes on the right, and he did not look up when she came in. She crossed to the counter and picked up the cup he had set there. She sat down across from him. He turned one of the papers slightly so she could see the line he was working on. A surveyor's notation. Something about the road grade past the eastern lots. She looked at it. He moved the paper another inch toward her, and she read. The deed arrived on a Thursday. A rider came through from Laramie with a saddlebag full of county paperwork. Filed notices, survey confirmations, 2 letters for the trading post, and at the bottom of the stack, folded inside a plain envelope, the land transfer document with the territorial seal pressed into the lower corner. He brought it inside without ceremony, set it on the counter. Then he went back out to help with the fence line past the eastern lots, because the morning was clear, and the ground was still workable, and there was always something that needed doing before the next thing needed doing. She found it when she came in to start the midday meal. The cedar box was on the counter where she had left it. The envelope was beside it. She picked up the envelope first, read the notation on the front, Harlan Crossing, Wyoming Territory, land transfer, April 1880, and opened it. She read it through once. Then she read the second name. She stood very still for a moment. Her hand was flat on the counter. Outside, she could hear him and 2 of the other men moving along the fence line, the intermittent sound of a post being driven, someone calling a measurement across the distance. She did not go to the door. She set the deed down on the counter beside the cedar box and looked at both of them for a long moment. The document with its official seal, and the box with its false bottom, and the folded paper inside that no bank had ever been able to reach, and something in the alignment of them, the document and the box, side by side on the same counter in the same room, did something to her breathing that she did not try to name. She picked up her coffee. She sat down at the table. When he came in at midday, he did not ask whether she had seen it. He washed his hands at the basin, dried them on the cloth hung by the door, and sat down across from her. She pushed the deed toward the center of the table so he could reach it if he needed to reference it. He glanced at it, and then moved it slightly to the left, next to the survey papers, and that was where it stayed. They ate. Outside, Harlan Crossing went about its Thursday. 23 people moving through an ordinary afternoon in a place that had a name now, a deed, a road grade past the eastern lots, a well that had not run dry since July. She refilled her coffee from the pot on the stove. She sat back down. He was already looking at the road notes. She looked at them too.